Welcome to Dark Character Profiler. Take a deep dive into the background and personalities of villains from books, video games, manga, and comics. Psychological analysis of some of the most deviant and heinous characters of all time. Now, here's Fulcrum.
Hello and welcome. I'm Fulcrum. Before we get started, I wanted to plug my dad, Rich, who helped produce my show's intro and outro. If you're into actual musicians playing actual music on actual instruments, please check out the Never Ending Radio Show at neverendingradioshow.com. Timeless music, timeless principles, neverendingradioshow.com. Now, on to the episode. Okay, so picture this. You're Samwise Gamgee and are in Frodo Baggins' garden at his home, Bag End, and are eavesdropping, also known as dropping some eaves. And you hear that Frodo has to go to Mount Doom to take a powerful ring there. You're discovered by Gandalf and are selected to accompany Frodo. At one point during your journey, you start to feel as though someone has been following you, and you bring it up to Frodo. He then tells you that it is probably the creature that Gandalf had previously warned you about, Gollum. You start to get worried as you know that he is very dangerous. You can only hope to lose him during your travels. Now I would like to give you a little bit of a character history for Smeagol, or also known as Gollum. His first appearance was in The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien in 1937. Gollum was one of 7 ring bearers, first Sauron, then Isildur, then Deagol, then Smeagol, then Bilbo, then Frodo, and Sam for a time. Overall, Gollum had the ring for about 500 years, and the ring extended his life dramatically. And during this time, he was living under the Misty Mountains until he encountered Bilbo. At one point during The Hobbit, he lost the ring to Bilbo Baggins in a game of riddles. Gollum is a stoor-like hobbit. In the words of Gandalf, quote, "I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the stoors, for they loved the river and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds." The townsfolk where Gollum lived, near the Gladden Fields, started calling him Gollum due to using the ring for malicious purposes, resulting in his expulsion from his family and ultimately the village. Now I would like to give you all a little bit of a description of his physical appearance. His physical appearance is a little bit tricky because there's actually not much about his physical appearance other than the fact that he crawls on all fours, he has thin limbs, a long skinny neck, his eyes are described as pale and gleaming, he has a great sense of smell, quote, "He can hear as keen as elves," per Frodo. He has a large head, sharp teeth, and finally, in the words of Bilbo from The Hobbit, Gollum is, quote, "as dark as darkness, except for 2 big, round, pale eyes in his thin face." This was just a brief character history and a little bit of a physical description for the character Gollum before we move on to his personality and his final analysis. Before we delve into the psychological analysis, I want to provide you with a disclaimer. While I am not a licensed psychologist, I do have a Master of Science degree in forensic psychology. This allows me to offer a unique perspective on potential disorders based on the characteristics and descriptions of these fictional characters. Please remember, this is not an official diagnosis, but rather an interpretation of characteristics. All analyses were researched using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This disclaimer ensures we approach these discussions with the utmost respect and sensitivity towards mental health issues. Now, I would like to break down Gollum's personality for you all. So, Gollum has two distinct personalities. His main one is Smeagol, and his secondary one is Gollum. Gollum and Smeagol are both known to be liars, wicked, mischievous. Smeagol is known to be anxious. They're both known to be obsessive. Gollum is mainly known to be hostile, malicious. Smeagol is more paranoid, and they're both known to be envious. At the end of the last episode, I posted a poll for everyone to guess the final outcome of Gollum's psychological analysis. 33.3% said dissociative identity disorder, and another 33.3% said PTSD. 16.7% said schizophrenia, and another 16.7% said other. The final psychological analysis came out to be dissociative identity disorder and antisocial personality disorder. I thought I would find PTSD as a final analysis. However, after reviewing the criteria, I found that it didn't really fit, and I will provide an explanation after breaking down the other two. Dissociative identity disorder is commonly known as multiple personality disorder, and it has several diagnostic criteria that must be found in the client or patient in order to provide such a diagnosis. So the first criteria is a disruption of identity characterized by two or more distinct personality states, which may be described in some cultures as an experience of possession. The disruption in identity involves marked discontinuity in sense of self and sense of agency, accompanied by related alterations in affect, behavior, consciousness, memory, perception, cognition, and/or sensory motor functioning. These signs and symptoms may be observed by others or reported by the individual. So this first criteria is evidenced by the fact that there are two distinct personalities within Gollum. So there's Smeagol, who is the original personality, and then there's Gollum, who is the secondary personality. Gollum is more dominant despite being the secondary personality. Gollum's personality slowly began to take shape after Smeagol kills his friend Deagle, but doesn't really take form until he's kicked out of his family and his village. Gollum is markedly more malicious and evil than Smeagol, even though technically Smeagol is the one who murdered his friend for the ring. The second criteria is recurrent gaps in the recall of everyday events, important personal information, and/or traumatic events that are inconsistent with ordinary forgetting. So for this criteria, there aren't any real gaps in recall of events, as Smeagol and Gollum often interact with each other. And there is one possible gap in Smeagol's recall of killing Deagle on occasion, as he often refers to the event as the ring being presented to him as a birthday present, but in one instance, he does actually admit to Gandalf that he killed Deagle in order to get the ring. So this one's kind of up in the air. The next criteria is the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So for this criteria, Smeagol and Gollum have definite impairment in social and other important areas of functioning. For 500 years, Gollum is the dominant personality and they are completely isolated with little to no interaction until they encounter Bilbo Baggins when Bilbo stumbles into Gollum's cave. The next criteria is the disturbance is not a normal part of a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice. For this criteria, it's not attributed to any cultural or religious practices. And the last criteria is the symptoms are not attributable to physiological effects of a substance. For example, blackouts or chaotic behavior during alcohol use or another medical condition such as complex partial seizures. And this criteria is not attributed to the use of any substances or Gollum or Smeagol having any other medical condition. Antisocial personality disorder is the other final analysis that I came up with for Smeagol or Gollum. So the criteria for antisocial personality disorder is 1. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So this is evidenced by Smeagol, not Gollum, but Smeagol killing his friend Deagle for the One Ring because he was just obsessed with it from the moment he saw it when Deagle found it. And, quote, he took to thieving and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So the second criteria is deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. This one is evidenced by Smeagol discovering that the ring made him invisible, which he used for malicious purposes. Quote, he became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. Number 3 is impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. So I found that this one wasn't really applicable. He actually did have a plan, which was to use the ring to sneak around so that he could steal and listen in on conversations and just be the ultimate sneak around the village. Though this was kind of unsuccessful as the village knew that it was him behind the antics. So even though it was unsuccessful, he still had a plan for what he was trying to do. Number 4 is irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. I have another quote that I would like to read from the Lord of the Rings books, and it says, "It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned, when visible, by all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet." Unquote. He would also kill goblins and eat them if they wandered into his cave in The Hobbit. Number 5 is reckless disregard for safety of self or others. So the best evidence that we have for this is the fact that he killed his best friend over a ring. Number 6 is consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. Number 6 is evidenced by Smeagol killing his best friend so that he can get the ring, and then proceeding to use the ring to turn invisible so that he can steal and eavesdrop on the other villagers while invisible. He also uses the ring to help him with eating goblins and things that would travel into his cave in the Hobbit book. He does also attempt to eat Bilbo, but because Bilbo technically won the game of riddles on a technicality because Gollum didn't know what was inside his pocket, Bilbo was able to escape being eaten by Gollum. And the last one is lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from others. As can be seen in the previous criteria, Gollum has a lack of remorse for all of the actions that he has taken throughout the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books. This is just a breakdown of antisocial personality disorder and why I believe it is applicable to Gollum and Smeagol. Next, I would like to give you all kind of an explanation as to why I thought at first that I would include PTSD as a final analysis, but then decided not to. So, when first considering Gollum and Smeagol as a character in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit book, I automatically thought that they would both have, well, Smeagol would have PTSD that would result in his diagnosis of, or his final analysis of, dissociative identity disorder. And the reason for that is because in the differential diagnosis for dissociative identity disorder, it states that some traumatized individuals have both post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. Accordingly, it is crucial to distinguish between individuals with PTSD only and individuals who have both PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. So, when looking at Gollum as a character, you automatically think that the event that caused his dissociative identity disorder was the killing of Deagle, because shortly after he starts developing his second personality. However, when looking at the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, it paints kind of a different story. So the first criteria is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or violence in one or more of the following ways: directly experiencing the traumatic event or events, witnessing in person the events as they occurred to others, learning that the traumatic event or events occurred to a close family member or close friend. In cases of actual or threatened death of a family member or friend, the event or events must have been violent or accidental, and for experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of the traumatic event or events. For example, first responders collecting remains, police officers repeatedly exposed to details of certain types of abuse. So, based on that first criteria alone, Smeagol does not qualify for post-traumatic stress disorder as a differential diagnosis that led into his dissociative identity disorder, mainly because he was the one who created the event, not the event happened to him or he witnessed the event. So it was a little bit difficult to justify giving him the differential diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder as something that would contribute to his development of dissociative identity disorder. I believe that the dissociative identity disorder was a direct result of killing Deagle and then utilizing the One Ring all the time, because the One Ring is something that corrupts the person who is wearing it. So that's my explanation as to why I now don't believe that post-traumatic stress disorder is something that contributed to Smeagol developing dissociative identity disorder and thus developing Gollum as his second personality. That is all I have for Gollum and Smeagol, so I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Your feedback is crucial. Do you agree or disagree with this analysis? Your comments on this episode or in the comments section for the Instagram or X profiles for the podcast are highly valued. Also, please like this episode and share it with your friends and family. The show's email address and social media links are provided in the episode description. All resources are also provided in the episode description. Don't forget to take a look at the poll at the end of this episode where you can vote on what you think the final breakdown will be for the next episode's villain. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you for listening to Dark Character Profiler with Fulcrum. Listen every other Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Podcasts.